Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 1. In those days, when, again, a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. And he directed the crowds to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. They set them before the crowd, and they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Verse 11. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Verse 14. Now, they had forgotten to bring bread, and they only had 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And he began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not understand? Verse 22. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, Do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hand on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, Do not even enter the village. Verse 27. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, Who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets. And he asked them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And he called the crowds to him with his disciples and said to them, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. This is where Jesus unequivocally affirms to his disciples, as they have slowly determined that he is in fact the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one. This is crazy. No one's expecting Jesus to be Jesus. And here's why. The word Christ, or Messiah in the Hebrew, literally means anointed, as in had oil poured on it. Now, we don't anoint people, and it's a little odd for us as Americans. We inaugurate people. We swear people in. It's very, ceremonious, and, the hand on the Bible and repeat after me, and people are making covenants. In the Old Testament, in Israel, you poured oil, and this was a picture of God's choice for a person. And there was 3 categories of people that were anointed. Prophets were anointed, priests were anointed, and kings were anointed. And Jesus, as the Messiah, now lots of people were messiahs or anointed for different things, but it's the difference between saying, here's a bucket of Beatles, right? Here's Beatles, and here's the Beatles. Now I'm talking about the Beatles. What 4 people come to mind? If I talk about the Beatles, and I don't give you any context, do you think Bugs? No. You think Ringo, George, Paul, and John, right? Maybe not in that order. I'm young. The Beatles. Jesus is the Messiah. There's this messianic expectation that one would come and fulfill all of God's promises, make good on all the things God said he would do, right all the wrongs, bring justice, bring judgment, usher in a new era, and in that era, Israel is on top. And right now, Israel is on the bottom. They are under Roman oppression, and so here's what all of the Israelites are thinking about the Messiah. They're thinking mainly about that king role. They're not thinking too much about that prophet role, revealing God and making God known and clear and understood. They're not thinking too much about that priestly role, that concept that we're not okay with God and we need someone to get in there and make us all right with God and to play that priestly intermediary role. They're not thinking too much about that. They're focused primarily on the kingly role, the forever king promised in 2 Samuel chapter 7, that a descendant of David would sit on the throne in Israel forever. And so they've got their eyes fixed on that. And that's the only attribute they're looking for in the candidate for Messiah. And Jesus? Not very messianic. Doesn't quite have that command. Doesn't rule armies very well. Hasn't been in charge of much. Doesn't really have that much messianic experience. Not very messianic. Now, the Messiah is meant to be God's final prophet, the one who reveals God not in part, but fully. He's meant to be God's finest priest, a priest that does not need to make sacrifice for himself and whose sacrifice of himself is good for all people for all time. And he's meant to be the forever king who will last forever and reign forever because he is undefeated and has defeated death and the grave. Jesus knows that. In retrospect, a lot of us know that. The Jews didn't know that. The disciples didn't know that, and so they didn't understand Jesus. And so it's not so much what kind of Messiah they're expecting, hoping for, willing to follow. It's really, the question is, what kind of Messiah is Jesus? And I just want to point you to 4 things that I see in this text that are different than what people would expect from a Messiah, but very clearly who Jesus is, and they meet real needs for us today. And the first one is that Jesus is a compassionate Messiah. A compassionate Messiah. You don't want to overstate this or understate this. It's very easy for us to think Jesus, think compassion, right? Because Jesus is compassionate. He does lots of compassionate things. We've gone through the story already. We just read about his healing of this blind person, and so we go, yeah, Jesus, compassionate. Slow down for a second. The people who rule the world tend not to be compassionate. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. If you ever get around very powerful, very successful people, they don't really care about the little guy too much. They usually have big picture ideas, big picture goals, and they don't have time to slow down and pay attention to anybody. And that's not Jesus. How in the world could Jesus be the Messiah, the forever king, the one to reign over the whole world when he's kind of soft? And in fact, he's really, really, really attuned into human need. Think about this. Here in chapter 4, chapter 8, he's about to feed 4,000 people. He's got them out in a desolate place, in a desert, in the wintertime, on the ground. It's dry, it's dirty, it's gross. Everyone's been listening to him for 3 days, and they've got a couple-day walk. They've got no food, and he's looking at their physical well-being, and he's going, I can't send these people away. They're going to pass out from exhaustion and from malnourishment, and so we have to feed these people. The disciples aren't thinking that. At best, they're like, we need to wrap this up. It's time to go. I'm hungry. They're hungry. Let's just call it a day, right? That's their level of compassion. Jesus says, no, I'm going to intervene supernaturally and feed everyone. All throughout the book of Mark, and this is Peter's source work we see again and again, Peter continually reminds us of how hungry he always was. I've pointed this out a couple times if you've been following along in the study. It's like, yeah, we were ministering, and then we kept going. We didn't have time to eat. And then we got in the boat, and we were all starving. And then we're like, right here in this passage, we only have one loaf of bread. Oh, freaking out. Hungry, 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 hungry. And we can laugh at that, but that's every single one of you as well. It's 11:03 right now, and if I preach for like 18 more minutes, you're going to be going, is he going to wrap this up? I'm starving. We've got lunch plans. Your stomach's going to be talking to you. Some of you that skipped breakfast, you're like, why did I do that? Oh, what's left in the back? Because we are right there. That's where we live. We live right here. What we want, what we feel, all of this right here all the time. This is what commands us. In fact, you want to ask what it is that you do and how do you make your decisions? You do what you feel like doing. And your feelings tend to be the things that drive you. And Jesus is very aware of that. And here's the beautiful thing. He's compassionate towards it. You think Jesus, of all people, could be the one to be like, hold your belly, please, people, come on. It's easy for me to be that way. Come on, you can't sit for 45 minutes without thinking about lunch. I'm like, I keep talking about it, so. Jesus, though, filled with compassion. And he wanted to make it this way. In fact, the plan for Messiah would be compassion. Hebrews 2:17-18 says, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation or substitution for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. That means there's just nothing you're going to feel that Jesus can't relate to. There's nothing you're going to fear he can't relate to. There's nothing you're going to want, desire. There's no heartache. There's no longing. There's no disappointment, depression that Jesus can't actually relate to in human experience. And he promises, as we see, that he has compassion towards you. Isn't that amazing? Not the ruler of the free world, not the ruler of the known world, the ruler of the whole world for all time, and he cares about you and how you feel. It's amazing to me. Second thing we see, and that the disciples did not, is that the Messiah, Jesus, is a worldwide Messiah. Somebody say worldwide. Worldwide. The disciples and the Jews, they had their eyes set too close. They were right here. And the reason was, God had made amazing promises to Israel. Amazing promises. Take some time and read Deuteronomy 28. He says, listen, if you'll faithfully obey me, Deuteronomy 28, the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all I've commanded you. Actually, I have it on the overhead. You can read part of it with me. He says, God will set you high above the nations of the earth. Israelites are like, we're supposed to be in charge on this earth. That's what God said. We're supposed to be on top of the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall be in the city, blessed shall you be in the field, blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, and the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in and when you go out. This is like Fox and Socks blessing. I'm blessed here, I'm blessed there, I'm blessed everywhere. If I'm following Jesus, if I'm following the voice of the Lord. And so the Israelites said, I take God at his word. I expect that to happen. We should be on top. But what they did was they just kind of focused in on us. And it became us and them. And we're supposed to be on the top and they're supposed to be on the bottom. We're supposed to be the head and they're supposed to be the tail. And they missed the fact that the Messiah is a worldwide Messiah. It's always been the plan. It's always been in there. You can see it. God made Abraham a blessing to be a blessing. All the way back to the beginning. Through him, all the nations on the earth would be blessed. This worldwide Messiah was making this known to his disciples by feeding 5,000 Jews in Galilee and then taking them into the enemy territory of Tyre and Sidon and into the Gentile area and then doing the exact same thing for the uncovenanted, uncalled, unclean Gentiles. That's what he was doing when he fed the 4,000. He said, there's a bigger picture going on. Do you see it? Do you get it? Look what he says. The Pharisees arrive in verse 11, and they start to challenge Jesus and they want a sign. And he says, no sign's going to be given to them. And then he starts to warn his disciples. They're focusing on their bread. He starts to warn them about the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Let me tell you this. Pharisees and Herod have nothing in common. 0 things in common. Herod, Pharisees, totally different, right? But now they're both opposed to Jesus. Now the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod are the same thing. It's opposition to Jesus, opposition to what he's doing, opposition to where he's going, opposition to how he's working. And so he says, watch out that doesn't get into your heart. It's like the bacteria that causes dough to rise. That's how it gets in and it starts to take over. So watch out for that. Of course, they didn't understand that. They thought he was talking about bread. We're not going to get bread from Herod. What are you talking about? And he says, do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts not hardened? Do you have eyes and can't see and ears but can't hear? And do you not remember? And then he points out the numbers. He says, listen, I did these miracles in a specific way, and I gave you some really familiar numbers so that you would get a big picture. What did he say? Remember when I fed the 5,000, which were Jews? Yes. How many baskets of leftovers were there? 12. How many apostles are there? 12. How many tribes of Israel are there? 12. Do you see what I'm doing here? I'm the provider for all God's people, and there's supposed to be leftovers. Oh. Now we're going to go to the Gentile territory, and I'm going to do the same thing that I do for the Jews, for them. Oh. And there's going to be leftovers. Oh. And how many baskets? 7. 7, the number of fullness, completion. Everything's reached its directed end, right? 7, get it? No. Jesus is helping his disciples see through object lesson that the Messiah is here to bring blessing to the whole world, provision to the whole world, spiritual nourishment, bread through the life, death, and resurrection of the Messiah, the Son of God, on whom we all feast in order to have life. Still didn't get it. Jesus is the worldwide Messiah. Matthew 28:19, Jesus is ascending into heaven. What does he say? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. You read Acts chapters 1 and 2 and 3, and they're like, we'll just stay right here. No. God has to intervene over and over and over and over again, even after he's ascended, sent the Holy Spirit, showing everybody, this is for everyone. Jesus is worldwide. They didn't want worldwide. They wanted kingdom-wide, Jews on top, Israel rules the world, so they couldn't see that Jesus was the Messiah. This is amazing, though. Jesus is not only the worldwide Messiah, and this is what will start to blow your mind. Because he's compassionate, even though he is the worldwide Messiah, he's a personal Messiah. You see, the world needs an anointed one. It needs a king to rule over it. The government does a bad job. Anybody? Yeah? And we the people, not too impressive either. Monarchies, dictatorships, not going so well for us, is it? The world needs a king, but it needs a perfect king, a selfless king, and a transforming king. And Jesus is that king. And he does that not by dominating the globe as the worldwide leader who by force takes over. He does that by entering the individual willingly received by faith. He's a personal Messiah, and he puts it on display as he leads this blind man out of a village. I've read Mark, I don't know how many times, and this past couple weeks as I've read chapter 8 again, it really jumped out at me off the page. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Jesus, the superstar, super crowded, out in the outskirts of town. Can you imagine somebody super famous coming to Allendale, Sam Sula, Holly Hill? Unannounced, just shows up. There'd be like dozens or hundreds of people flocking. No one else would know. Jesus, the superstar, in town, and they bring a blind man to him. Now, we're all the same way. People make us uncomfortable. Now, I get to get over this because we have the Conklin Center for the Blind and Multi-Handicapped in Daytona through the Lions Club. We had years where we had lots and lots of blind people that were part of our church, and so I had to get over the uncomfortableness of not knowing how to help and talk to and deal with blind people because I had lots of blind friends. So I learned all the things about having a blind friend and leading blind people and made all the mistakes and said all the wrong things. Jesus, everybody sees the blind guy, they're like, aren't you supposed to stay over there? And we'll throw you some stuff after lunch. That's how it works. And we can kind of still have that attitude towards disabled people. I'm just going to do it this way. Jesus, they bring him to Jesus, and he stops the whole show. And he takes the blind guy by the hand and leaves everybody else. And they just walk off. Have you ever noticed that phrase? He led him out of the village. I'm like, where are they going? He's a personal Messiah. He went to minister to the one. He left the crowd to heal the one. And he didn't just do it. He could have just been like, healed. Okay, go on. Amazing. Look, healing blind people. Great. No. He took him into a private place. With the disciples, he's a personal Messiah. It's one of the reasons I love NASCAR. I love NASCAR because everybody's famous, but they're not too famous. No one's too big for their britches. I'm in Publix last year leading up to the 500, and Ryan Blaney's standing there next to the public manager in the lobby of my Publix 304 at Bevel and Clyde Morris. Hey, how's it going? No, most people don't know who Ryan Blaney is, but he's there and he's talking to people, and if you go onto the track and the drivers are out walking around and Kevin Harvick walks by, you can talk to Kevin Harvick and he'll talk to you. You can talk to Clint Boyer. You can say, oh yeah, you want an autograph? Sure, no problem. It's very personal. They're not, when I was a kid, I went to a Daytona Cubs game back when the Daytona was the Cubs, right? And Ryne Sandberg was there because he had a wrist injury. So we were all about seeing Ryne Sandberg in Daytona, and we waited outside of the door with all the team members. We waited for an hour and a half. They all started coming out, and no Ryne Sandberg. What happened? He walked out the front door like a rock star, boom, and just ignored everyone, got into his fancy car and drove off. So mad. Waited so long. NASCAR drivers, very personal. None of them go for a walk with someone and ask, oh, how's your car running? Can we take care of something for you? Let's fix you up. But the Messiah, the forever king, the highest high priest, the most important and final prophet of God, will take all the time in the world for you. The world needs a king like that. You need a king like that. And that's the kind of Messiah Jesus is. He said in Luke 12:6-7, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? I actually didn't know that because I don't buy sparrows. So rhetorically, I learned, apparently, 5 sparrows, 2 pennies. Point being, not very expensive. And not one of them is forgotten before God. So he's paying attention to the details. Why, even the hairs of your head are all numbered, right? Matthew, Jesus is talking to different group of people, and he says, a sparrow doesn't fall to the ground. I wonder if he ever said, none of your hairs fall to the ground without me knowing about it. He's talking about anxiety, so it would seem fitting, but it's never in there. Fear not, he says, you are of more value than many sparrows. He says, listen, you're important to God. The whole reason I'm here, the whole reason I'm on the scene, doing what I'm doing, being the high priest, being the final prophet, being the forever king, going through life to be able to feel with you, to suffer with you, to know what it's like. The whole reason for this big picture is because God wants you. Because God wants you. Because God wants you to be a part of his forever kingdom. Jesus is a personal Messiah. And then lastly, and this is where it gets tough, because Jesus is the all or nothing Messiah. Jesus is the all or nothing Messiah. See, part of our difficulty as Americans is we tend to just like put our little filter on everything. And so right now we're all trying to pick candidates, and we're trying to pick a president, and we're trying to evaluate. And when Americans vote, a president will be chosen, and that president will be chosen because some people voted. That may or may not represent actual America. That's still yet to be determined. But the president will be chosen and made president by people. The Messiah, not so much. I actually titled the sermon, Jesus for Messiah. But Jesus isn't running for Messiah. He's not trying to get your vote or your allegiance. The reality is a much harsher one than that. It's a much more profound one than that. The world needs a Messiah, requires a Messiah, for anyone to have life and to be redeemed from the pit, for anyone to be made whole and forgiven, for anyone to be the object of God's mercy, love, and compassion, and not only or primarily God's justice and judgment. A Messiah is required, and Jesus is that Messiah. And the news that Jesus is that Messiah hits you in the face. Because it doesn't matter if you like him or not. It doesn't matter if you're for Jesus the Messiah. You know what I don't like about Jesus the Messiah? It doesn't matter. This is not a popularity contest. Jesus is the Messiah. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Jesus began to teach them. He starts this question with them in verse 27. Who do people say that I am? And that's easy. And what do they say? Oh, you're John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the other prophets, probably Jeremiah. All of these are people that were kind of expected figures of these types of people to come before Messiah. So everybody's kind of saying, yeah, you're Messiah-ish, but maybe make a good vice president, good surgeon general. Maybe you'll be in the cabinet. I don't see Jesus as like, he's not quite there. He's maybe in this range right here. So that's what people say. What do you say? Because that's what matters. What are you going to do about it? Then Peter says, you're the Christ. Jesus says, okay, you're right about the title, probably wrong about everything else. So he begins to teach them. This in chapter 8 we see begins. So something new is happening in chapter 8. And he began to teach them, verse 31, that the Son of Man, a phrase that he uses many more times for himself in Mark, but only once before in chapter 2, the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. Here's the big picture, everybody. The Messiah is not what you think. In order for the Messiah to bring compassion to your front door, in order for the Messiah to act in a way that makes forgiveness possible for Israel and extends salvation to the world, the only way the Messiah can make that happen is through his own death. All that sacrifice stuff in the Old Testament was a picture of the human problem that had to be solved by a perfect sacrifice, and there's only one. All the big pictures coming together, and here's how it's going to crystallize: through the rejection, execution, death, and resurrection of the Messiah after the third day. Very plainly. And I think Peter just thinks Jesus is having a hard time. Jesus, can we talk for a second? Come here. Listen, the way you're talking, kind of freaking everybody out. Do you need a break? You need some me time? You want to go for a walk? Want to go for one of your walks and pray? We kind of need you to be alive, because that's important for the king to be, alive. And so he rebukes Jesus. And Jesus, notice that Peter gives Jesus the respect of pulling him aside. You ever notice that? Come over here. Jesus looks over his shoulders, sees the disciples. What are they talking about over there? Get behind me, Satan! Your mind's not set on the things of God, it's set on the things of man. What did that start? All the disciples are like, dang, Peter, what did you say? Jesus is sending a very clear signal. I'm here to die. And if you want to go and be a part of the eternal kingdom, you got to follow me to your death. Not a very popular campaign strategy. I get all those pesky emails from all the people I showed interest in online. Oh, I'm interested in this candidate. I'd like to find out some more. Every day they ask me for money. Every single day, every single one of them. I'm like, I'm not going to give you $7. Stop asking, right? Unsubscribe. Doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Jesus doesn't ask for your $7. Doesn't ask for your campaign contribution. Doesn't even ask for your vote. He says, I want you to be a part of the forever kingdom, but it's going to cost you your life in exchange for your soul. And what he does is he opens up our eyes to the epic that's going on all around us. You see, we get so zeroed in on our stomach. I'm hungry. I'm thinking about what I want for my birthday next, Valentine's Day plans, what's on my wish list on Amazon, all my wants. That's where I live, right in here. And every once in a while we look in the mirror and we go, oh, I'm getting old. Oh, look back down here, right? Right? That's what happens. And we just stay in our wants, stay in real. And Jesus says, listen, you got to get way bigger picture than that. Because your soul is hanging in the balance. At some point, I'm coming back in the glory of the Father, fully revealed with the holy angels to bring judgment on the whole earth. And everyone will give an account for what he's done in the body, righteous deeds and unrighteous, and everyone will get what they deserve, except for those in the Messiah. The ones in the Messiah get what he deserves. Because on the cross, he took what they deserved. And so he says, there's nothing worth giving up for that. And so if you want to be a part of that kingdom, come after me. Learn, follow. Just follow. I love the blind man just follows Jesus. You don't have to know everything there is to know. There's a lot that gets, I learn stuff all the time. I've been a Christian for 18 or so years. I've been pastor for 12 years. I read the Bible and I go, what? That's in there? Now I have to do that. Okay, just follow Jesus a little bit at a time. Follow Jesus. It's going to be like a cross. And we can't connect with the cross. We have a couple minutes left. We can't connect with the cross. People say, oh, it's like the electric chair. Not like the electric chair. The barbarism of the cross was meant to send a big message. Rome is in charge and you are not. You do what you're told or you end up there. You oppose Rome, humiliation, shame, cursing. We are powerful, we are in control. You are a peasant and you will do what you're told. It was a domination. It was like the beheadings of ISIS. We are going to show you that we are to be feared. The cross was to be looked down upon by everyone all the time, only, always. Nothing about it was good, sanctimonious, or holy. And Jesus knew he was going there, and he says, you got to be willing to pick up your cross. What does that mean? It means you turn your back on the powers of this world. It means you turn your back on finding a place in this kingdom, of being allegiant to the powers at be. It means you go treason on the world around you. It means you follow God no matter what that means, how it affects you negatively. That means you give up your creature comforts and the things that make you happy and the life that you want to live, and you say, I'm going to die with Jesus. I'm giving up. He says, do it, I do it no matter what the cost. Right? It means you put on the shame of association. See, one day Jesus is going to come back, and all the people who right now are wrong about Jesus are going to be like, oh, that's what you meant. In the meantime, there's shame associated with Jesus. We're all in church. It's easy to talk about Jesus in church. No shame in here. Go to your work, go to your job, go to Tunis, go to Morocco, Egypt. Go to some places where Jesus. Go to places where there's opposition to Jesus and there's shame. Go into just very liberal parts of the United States where if you're religious at all or believe in God, you're a moron. And that's how you'll be treated. Oh, you're a small-minded religious person. How quaint. And there will be a certain amount of shame put out there on you. Jesus says, bear the shame. Throw it on your back like a cross and walk with it. Yes, I'm with Jesus. Because he's going to come back, and everyone who was wrong about Jesus is going to be like, oh, that's what you were talking about. But he says, listen, be proud of me now, and I'll be proud of you then. Keep your eyes there. Jesus is the all-or-nothing Messiah. Jesus doesn't need your vote. He wants your soul. He wants your life. He wants your allegiance, and he wants you to say it's worth everything. It's worth anything. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. I'm putting it to you really hard. I'm putting it to you just smack in the face like the text does. Jesus doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's like, all right, everybody, listen up. Put on your cross and die. Follow me. Whoa, man, that hits everybody like a cup of cold water in the face. So I don't apologize for that. But here's the amazing thing. Being in the kingdom, being a part of the life of Jesus, waking up every day to hope and peace and love and security and power and purpose and family and community and mission, waking up and being a part of the big picture and walking into every part of life and seeing people like this, woo, 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 and being like, hey, bigger picture. Being the vessels of love and affection and truth and all good things, joy and goodness and kindness and forgiveness and being like God to the world. That's what it means to be a part of the body of Christ. That's what it means to be a part of the kingdom of Jesus. That's what it means to be after the Messiah. It's amazing. It's the best thing you could possibly do. And he says, give up all that other stuff you call life and you'll find real life. You want to save your life, you got to lose your life. And that's what it means to follow Jesus. The kingdom is his, and he's welcoming you to join it and receive it. And the next 7 chapters, 8 chapters are going to get a little crazy. And so we're going to get to see what more and more it means to follow after